everybody. Welcome to another edition of Byline with Ben Dennis. We are going beyond the headlines to make sense of them. No spin. That's what we're going to do every single week. Coming to you on a Friday before your weekend. Shaking it up, though. We're going to start posting episodes on Monday to start the work week. Why? Because not only do we find out why these headlines matter without filler and fluff, but also questioning what is still unknown about them and how it may impact your day-to-day and the days ahead. I think it would be prudent to do it at the top of the week versus the end. Instead of a recap, if you will, on a Friday, we will set up your week for success. So today, I am diving into conversation with Todd Huntley. He is the director of the National Security Law program at Georgetown University Law. An interesting career this man has had at the Pentagon. He was a legal advisor to top members of the military, commanders, especially when the United States was deployed in the Middle East and Afghanistan and Iraq. He was giving advice of what was legal and what was not. If strikes that we were about to carry out could be challenged in a court of law, and if the United States had enough proof, in his opinion, to go and legally target certain areas. He also talks about what he had to weigh morally at the time, but we dive into the news of the day, and that is President Trump says that Democrats who are reminding service members that they can defy an illegal order, what Democrats are doing is seditious. He's reposting on social media right now that they should be physically harmed, killed. He says seditious behavior in all caps, punishable by death. Todd Huntley, who I interviewed, was the guy in the room where it happened, if you will. Hamilton fans, that's for you. He was providing legal advice to military members of what was legal and what was not. His take on what the president has to say, and more broadly, about what the United States is doing off the coast of Venezuela, bombing these boats, allegedly carrying drugs, fentanyl, into the United States. That's the claim from the Pentagon. I asked Todd if he thinks that what we're doing is legal right now, what he hopes to see in order for the U.S. to prove their case if fentanyl really is coming into the United States. He says, show us more proof. We'll dive into that. He also talks about his career path, how he got to where he is right now, how he got to the Pentagon even before he was at Georgetown University Law. Very interesting take from Todd. Afterward, we're going to talk about the latest headlines of the week. Government shutdown's over. It's done. But don't forget, it's only funded, the federal government, through the end of January. We're going to have to go through this reporting process as well. But the effects of the shutdown are starting to die out, if you will. Those flight delays and cancellations, they're starting to subside. There were the SNAP benefits that were paused at the start of November. They are finally coming to people who rely on those food stamps in order to put food on the table. And federal workers, hundreds of thousands of them that were furloughed, are back on the job. They're going to be getting their paychecks again. And some of them living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe they're still behind on rent. They might still have to find some supplemental income in order to play catch up. A couple more items to dive in. But with that, let's get to our conversation with Todd Huntley of Georgetown University Law Center. And joining me now on Byline is Todd Huntley. He is the director of National Security Law program at Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C. On my notes here, I write you down as the man in the room where it happened. Among your credentials, obviously a service vet, retired Navy captain, appreciate your service, no doubt. But also spending over 20 years as a judge advocate, advising what's legal, what's not during military operations. So I just dive in before we get to the news of the day, certainly. Take me through your role of time in the Pentagon being a judge advocate.
No, thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be with you. So there are just so many different aspects of being a judge advocate. And my time in the Pentagon was primarily spent as the senior lawyer for national security law for the Navy. So I wasn't directly involved in reviewing operations there. However, before that, I was assigned as a legal advisor at U.S. Special Operations Command, Special Operations Command Central, and then also for a special operations office in D.C. And in those roles, I certainly reviewed different operations, provided advice on how they should be conducted or how they could be conducted legally, and the application of not only domestic law, but the law of armed conflict international law more broadly to U.S. military operations in the Central Command in the Middle East.
I know right now we could talk about Ukraine, we could talk about Israel, we could talk about Venezuela, but let's start with the news of the day. You know, Democrats recently coming out telling service members, "Hey, you can defy an illegal order if you believe that to be the case." So let's just backtrack, go straight to the beginning here, nuts and bolts from a bird's eye view. What really is an illegal order? And if someone does defy one, or if someone does not defy one, are they on the hook? Is the president on the hook?
No, that's a great question. It's a very difficult question. Service members are put in a very difficult position when it comes to determining whether an order is lawful or unlawful, because the standard is that orders are presumed to be lawful, and unless it's clearly or manifestly unlawful, military members have a duty to obey that. And so it is, the weight is, I guess, on the side of obeying the order, and they have to determine that, right, if it's unlawful or not.
What does it look like if somebody does defy an order because they think it's unlawful? Do they get fired?
They probably will get removed from their position, depending on, what type of order and in the manner in which they disobeyed it or refused to follow it. They may face some sort of administrative punishment, being removed from the military, or they may even face criminal charges in a court-martial.
Well, it seems you have to weigh your morals as well when you are weighing these decisions. Certainly when certain people's lives are on the line, when people could be killed depending on the size and scope of a military operation, civilian or not. But I guess you have to weigh your reputational harm too. If you're a career service member, what's going through somebody's mind at that point? Has there ever been an example where you've come across someone who's defied an order?
No, I haven't. And I've been very fortunate in the that the commanders that I worked for and with and advised, there was never a doubt that the orders they were following and issuing were lawful. I never had an issue where I had a commander, kind of embark on a questionable type of activity or operation. So we're really in a very unusual place right now. And, the service member, again, might face a court-martial charge. I had somebody once tell me that they had a client ask them, "How do you know if an order is unlawful?" And his sarcastic reply was, "Well, you disobey that order, you go to court-martial, and if you're found not guilty, the order was unlawful." That's not a position we want to put our service members in, certainly. And so this is just a very unique situation. I can't think of another time we faced it.
So no longer are you in the room where it happened, if you will. At Georgetown University Law, I'm sure you keeping a close eye of what's going on in the Caribbean again and in the Middle East and between Russia and Ukraine right now. So I'm going to ask you point blank, are the Americans bombing on these alleged drug boats actually legal? Do we have any reason for doing this legally? I mean, a lot of the conversation is that Venezuela is helping traffic in fentanyl, but many law enforcement experts, career diplomats say that if anything, Venezuela is not helping bring in fentanyl, rather possibly cocaine. So is this really legal?
So obviously we don't have all the facts. You have to assume that the administration has some intelligence that perhaps, supports their position. But from what I've heard and seen, my opinion is that they're not lawful, that these the importation of drugs by cartels into the United States does not rise to the level of authorizing the use of military force directly against those vessels and those personnel on those vessels.
Even if there is tangible proof that fentanyl is being trafficked into the U.S. and possibly killing Americans, you still don't think that it would be legal?
No, I don't. I think it's a law enforcement matter that, certainly in the past, maybe we haven't been as successful in stopping the drug trade coming into the United States using law enforcement means. It hasn't, at least to my knowledge, in my opinion, gotten to the point where it has overwhelmed our law enforcement ability to stop that.
So what do you think is next? And who challenges the American strikes on these boats?
That's a good question. And, it's very difficult for someone to challenge, these orders or military operations. Perhaps we have a military member refuse to carry out, one of the operations or one of the strikes, and that individual is court-martialed. Perhaps we have one of these individuals that it's targeted survive and taken to court, in which case they might be able to bring up the lawfulness of the strikes. Probably, it may come up in that maybe one of the individuals killed is a dual U.S. Venezuelan citizen or a dual Spanish Venezuelan citizen, and they actually bring a case either in the United States or somewhere else, or their family members bring a case, and maybe it arises that way. But there's no clear, I think, no clear pathway for someone to challenge this in court. I would say, the opportunity that we perhaps had was when we had those two survivors of one of the strikes off the coast of Colombia a few weeks ago, but they were turned back over to, Ecuador and Colombia, respectfully.
Do they still have a case now, even though they're not in U.S. custody? And just for our listeners here, among some of those initial strikes that Todd had mentioned, there were two survivors, and apparently they were held for quite some time on American ships and then released back to their home countries. Do they still have legal standing, and what court do they take this to?
Now, again, I don't think they would have standing in the U.S. federal court, right? And if they tried to bring it in a court in their home country, the U.S. Would assert sovereign immunity, and so I really don't think there's much of a chance that those actions would be challenged. The opportunity would have been had they been brought back to the United States, charged with a federal crime such as material support to terrorism. There's actually a federal law that makes it unlawful to operate a semi-submersible unlicensed vessel, and at least from the media reports, this strike was on a semi-submersible vessel, so probably wouldn't have been a difficult federal criminal case to prove. And maybe that's why they released them. They didn't want these individuals, having access to the media, during their court cases.
Well, what do you think that says about our decision to release them back to their home countries instead of bring them over to the United States to face charges?
I think that is, perhaps one of the clear signs that these strikes are on very shaky legal ground or clearly unlawful. Because, again, in my time in advising on military operations, in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places, we would want to have detainees to interrogate, to gain further intelligence, right? That was one of the key elements that would allow U.S. forces to, continue targeting other members of these terrorist networks. And so I would think, and maybe they did on the ships, maybe they interrogated them and got all the intelligence they thought they could. But again, it just seems very odd that they would release these individuals.
Let's talk about your time when you were advising legal matters surrounding military operations in the Middle East. Just for example, take us behind the closed doors, obviously not sharing any specifics of operations and who may have ordered something at a certain time. But what's the timeline from when an order is made and it's ultimately deployed? And how long does it take? And who do you talk to in order to provide some of that legal advice?
I mean, the timeline could be weeks, or it could be minutes, right? And so we distinguish between deliberate targeting, which are targets that are identified ahead of or during the planning process for military operations. You have plenty of time to gather intelligence, to observe those targets, and then to, figure out how to strike them in a way that would be militarily effective, but also, reduce any harm to civilians around the area. Others are what we call dynamic targeting, right? A target pops up. We perhaps have intel that somebody is a target or a potential target. We haven't located that individual yet. We locate them, and within a matter of minutes, we only have a matter of minutes to strike, right? And so in either case, it is a process between military intelligence personnel who are, again, obtaining that targeting intelligence, individuals that we would call targeteers or fires who are planning, what types of munitions or weapon system we're going to use to target that individual. We'll have other operations specialists, planning that, again, determining what assets do we have in the area to use. And then the JAG would be working with all those individuals to review the intelligence supporting the strike, how the strike's going to be carried out to ensure that it complies with the law of armed conflict and the rules of engagement. And then ultimately, it's the commander or the target engagement authority who will determine yes or no, we're going to conduct a strike.
The United States obviously is not sending missiles from our mainland into Russia. However, we are supporting Ukraine, providing munition. Are we also providing them legal consult as well?
No, we're not. They have a very capable legal advisory capability. In fact, just back in the spring, they released a voluntary report on their compliance with the law of armed conflict and their operations. And so, you can find that document online and read basically all of, the measures that they have taken or are taken to ensure that their forces comply with the law of armed conflict. So, as far as I know, we are not providing JAGs to assist them. Our support has been primarily in providing equipment and, missiles and weapons. And again, from media reports, apparently we also provide some intelligence and targeting support.
Do you have any examples during your time at the Pentagon of where you weighed heavily the advice that you were about to give?
Yes. Anytime, you know, lives are at stake, right? You want to make sure that you have all the facts, that the advice you're given is based on, a full acknowledgement or full understanding of what the facts are, and also making sure that you're not falling into, basically relying on confirmation bias, right? You want to think that that individual driving that vehicle is a member of Al Qaeda, and therefore, if 3 out of 5 signs point to that individual, yeah, you're just going to say that individual is a member of Al Qaeda or whatever organization is being targeted. So yes, but on the other hand, also I was very fortunate to work with commanders who were very conscientious about making sure that before the trigger was pulled, they had the information required to order the strike.
Were there ever instances where you had certain intelligence presented to you and your team, and you thought, there isn't enough here, and you had to go back to the drawing board?
Yes. I mean, there were several times. I don't know if you remember the phrase military-aged male, which was basically used to refer to, anybody from 16 to 80 who was a male. In some cases, right, it was unusual for a male in that age range to not be carrying a weapon. So that alone did not necessarily make that individual a lawful target. And so there were times where, as an example, the intelligence folks would come and say, hey, we've identified this individual. He's a military-aged male engaged in nefarious activity.
It seems pretty vague.
Yeah. And so, what I did is I would start asking questions. Okay, nefarious. What do you mean? What types of activity, right? What exactly is he doing? Where was he doing it, right? Who was he doing it with? Do we have intelligence, signals intelligence or other types of intelligence linking that individual to known members of, the Taliban or Al Qaeda? And so, I guess my approach was if there was some vague, unclear information provided as a basis for a possible targeting decision, it was my job to clarify that and make sure that we had the information, because without that, I couldn't advise the commander on whether the strike was lawful or not.
Was it typically lower level staffers who may come with very vague or at least somewhat opaque evidence and that you had to rebuff?
I mean, not always lower level, mid level. I was mid level myself. Yeah, usually it wasn't more senior, but the people working the operations center floor, the staff, were all fairly, I wouldn't say junior, but more mid level.
How did you stumble into this role? Take me back.
Well, I have a very unusual career path. I enlisted in the Air Force right after high school, and then left active duty to go to college, switched over to the Army Reserve for a while, decided to go to law school, and then during law school, my mentor had been a Marine attorney, and my favorite classes were criminal law and international law. And so I thought, well, the JAG Corps is one place I can do both over the course of the career. So, I was a prosecutor my first 5 years, and then ended up being assigned to Special Operations Command. I mean, I was interested in going there, but in the end, right, you go where the Navy tells you to go. And so it was kind of just luck of the draw for me. And it was 2005. So obviously we were, right in the middle of the large-scale insurgent violence in Iraq. We were still involved in Afghanistan. And, the special operations community is pretty small, so you get to know people. And you become known. And so I was able to kind of stick around that community for, a good chunk of my career, working as a legal advisor.
Well, it seems like the only branch you did not have some paths cross with was the Space Force, but that wasn't around at the time.
Yeah. Yes.
I want to get you out here. What questions do you hope get answered right now, given these bombings on alleged drug boats? It seems like they're not ramping down.
I understand, right, the need to be careful with sensitive classified information, but I would hope that more of the Office of Legal Counsel opinion that justifies these strikes or says that they are lawful. I'm hoping that more of that is released, even if it's a redacted form. And I'm hoping that some more of the intelligence or information backing up the claims that these drug cartels are actually non-state organized armed groups engaged in what amounts to an armed conflict with the United States. And, again, people might say, well, they can't release that because it's classified. Well, go back to President Kennedy's administration, and they presented the satellite or the spy photos of the Soviet missiles in Cuba. That was a release of information, classified information, to justify potential U.S. use of military force. In January and February of 2022, they declassified and released the intelligence showing the Russian military buildup on the Ukrainian border. So it's possible.
So show us the proof, is what you're saying.
Show us more of the proof.
More proof, and not the ones that are sensitive and classified. Last thing I want to ask is, President Trump is saying Democrats are committing seditious behavior at the highest level right now. He's retweeting, retruthing, whatever you want to call it, some other posts saying that they should be hanged because they think that service members should be reminded of what is an illegal order or not. You were somebody that advised people of what was legal and what was not. What's your take on the chief executive, making these posts right now?
Well, he shouldn't do it. Sometimes the president can be his own worst enemy. And maybe somebody should take the phone out of his hand. But, even if these individuals have crossed a line, the president's comments would endanger their ability to get a fair trial. It is just, one, even if they are releasing some sort of classified information or violating some other federal laws, it surely doesn't cross the line into being treason or sedition. And so he should not be making those comments.
Todd, I like to stay in touch, especially you're getting phone calls left and right now, I'm sure, given the news of the day. So I appreciate you sticking with what was on your calendar.
No, Ben, you're quite welcome. And feel free to reach out again. And thanks a lot.
All right. As we just talked with Todd about, the Pentagon has now launched a brand new effort to go after so-called narco-terrorists in the Western Hemisphere. This is a continuation, a new operation, or at least a label of it right now, of the Pentagon bombing those boats off the coast of Venezuela. Maybe we will see the United States deploy more military assets into the region. Could we actually launch an operation into Venezuela to oust what many people see as a dictator, Nicolas Maduro, after he lost the presidential election? Well, the person who beat him in that election just won a Nobel Peace Prize. She apparently remains in hiding right now in Venezuela. We don't know where she is, but the United States certainly is not backing down of their efforts to at least appear to apply pressure on Maduro, as many analysts see what we're doing right now. And as Todd had mentioned, he's looking for more proof to make the point internationally and to the American people that these strikes on these boats are actually going after drug traffickers, narco-terrorists as they're called. But Todd's opinion is he still thinks that that is not legal. Tariffs on some goods coming into the United States, they're being pulled back, which means the cost of coffee, which has gone up, ground beef as well, and some tropical fruits, well, the costs are probably going to go down because those taxes on countries to send their goods into the United States, well, they're going to be somewhat alleviated. Democrats say this is the White House quasi-admitting that the tariffs actually raised prices on certain goods. White House is saying that these are trade deals and it's in line with the president's approach in order to bring down costs. We will have to see how it impacts those costs on the shelves. The Epstein files will soon come out. Possibly. The United States House of Representatives had a vote on the floor to release the unclassified documents into the investigation surrounding convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The Senate passed it, and now President Trump has signed this bill. But here is a possible loophole where we will not see the full extent of these documents. If an active law enforcement investigation is underway, typically, whether it's a small municipal police department or all the way up to the Department of Justice, if an investigation is still active, prosecutors can argue that they can't release certain information because they're still probing certain components of that investigation. We'll have to see if that's what happens here and blocks some of these Epstein files, as they're called, from coming out. But President Trump made that big time U-turn after months of opposing the release of these files, said, yep, Republicans in the House, go ahead, pass this bill. We need to get it done. Don't forget, President Trump also recently had said that Democrats were going to be investigated. There's an investigation into former President Bill Clinton now. President Trump is trying to put the focus onto Democrats, also claiming that his administration continues to be transparent on the issue. So who knows if we're going to see the full extent of these Epstein-related documents, and if so, when? And of course, the Thanksgiving holiday coming up. Black Friday and Cyber Monday are right around the corner. The National Retail Federation says that $900 is what the average American plans to spend on goods, food, decorations, other holiday-related items throughout the season. Some people may be cutting back. I will be curious, once all the rage is over, who ended up presenting some of the biggest deals? Was it Amazon? Was it Walmart? We know some retailers have offered expanded opportunities, longer days, or longer sales rather, several days, in order to woo consumers into their shops. What's going to be the hottest item? Will it be Apple's brand new product? Yeah, Apple unveiled this brand new iPhone case. They called it the iPhone Pocket. It's on the way. Some cases, apparently over $200. It looks like a massive tube sock, right? Straight out of the 80s. Well, they're selling it for hundreds of dollars. It's apparently a fashion statement. Is it? Is it not? Is it just a sock slung around your shoulder? I'm curious to see if it's going to be all the rage this holiday season. A stocking stuffer, a stocking within a stocking stuffer, a stocking as a stocking stuffer. Nonetheless, it's kind of funny to look at, but I'll see if some people end up buying this. That's going to do it for another edition of Byline with Ben Dennis. I am planning to post the next conversation on Monday, which is November the 24th, just before the Thanksgiving holiday. I have a conversation about AI and sports, how it's changing the player experience, the business side of the sport, and also the fan experience. What's working? What's not working? What deployment of AI is successful thus far? Will it change the game quite literally, and AI will take over referees and umpires? Is it going to track the health and fitness of players? Is it going to help coaches recruit players who may be in the minor leagues, high schools, etc., colleges, of course? So that conversation from a top expert at Johns Hopkins University, who specifically investigates the role of AI and sports. Great conversation to be had. Going to have that on Monday, the 24th. In the meantime, have a great weekend, everybody. We will see you on another edition of Byline soon. Take it easy.